It's October the 1st today, and traditionally it's the start of the predator fishing season, and it's also the opening day of the predator fishing on Rib Valley lakes where we're fishing today. We've got here very early this morning. We were here almost at the crack of dawn, and I've had a couple of hours fishing before Ben the cameraman arrived and caught a few perch and pike, so it's been a productive start. It was absolutely chucking it down this morning as well with rain. It really did feel pretty autumnal. So today I'm going to talk to you about some of the tips that will hopefully help you catch a few more fish as the temperatures start to cool and we head into the autumn months. The great thing about Rib Valley is that there are two lakes and the River Rib running adjacent to the lakes that we can lure fish all in the same day. So I've started off on the big lake today and we'll be hopping between both lakes and the river, and the great thing about it is that I'll be able to hopefully give you some ideas about fishing both rivers and still waters when targeting pike, perch, zander and chub in the autumn months as the temperatures are cooling. In many venues around the country, signal crayfish are one of the main prey items for all predatory species, and fishing something like a creature bait, especially in the autumn time, can be absolutely deadly. And the main reason for it is because crayfish spawn when the water temperature reaches about 12 degrees. So often when I'm fishing rivers and lakes, I'll often find areas where crayfish are actually gathering together, and often around these areas are places where you'll find pike and perch. There's quite a few different creature baits within the Strike King range, but I've pulled out 3 or 4 of my favourites and I'm going to talk you through each model and the differences between them really. So I'll start off with the largest of the soft baits. So this is the baby rage craw, and it's got large twin-tailed claws, so as it falls through the water it causes a lot of movement and it has a really slow fall rate because of the width of the claws at the back of the lure. It's great for casting to cover, such as overhanging trees and bushes. Because it has a slow fall rate, it gives the fish plenty of time to see the lure as it's falling, and you'll often get bites on the drop, which is great. Scaling down in size a bit and with a slightly different profile is the Rage Nedbug. So this has got slightly smaller appendages at the back of the bait, but it's also got these little fins at the side as well. And each of these appendages move through the water with a very subtle movement, and it gives it quite a unique action. It can work really well on heavily pressured venues, and I've caught some really nice perch on these over the last year or so. It's mainly designed to be fished on a Ned rig, but it can be fished Texas style, it can be rigged on a normal jig head, and even drop shotted as well. So it's quite a versatile little lure, this one, and it's caught a couple of fish this morning too. And sticking on the theme of Ned rigging, you've also got the Ned craw, which is kind of like a hybrid between the baby rage craw and the Ned bug. So it's essentially a twin tail. It's got 2 large twin tail claws, so it has a very slow fall rate, which is great for casting to overhanging structure, like I mentioned with the baby rage bug. It's a little bit more scaled down than the baby rage craw too, so if the fish want a slightly smaller meal, give this one a try. Another type of lure that perfectly mimics a crayfish is a skirted jig, especially when you rig it with a trailer, such as a creature bait. So this is the Bitsy bug. It's available in 3 and 7 gram models, and when rigged with a trailer such as the Ned bug, the Ned craw or the baby rage craw, it gives it a fantastic movement, and that large silicone skirt helps it fall through the water even slower and gives the fish more time to see the lure as it's falling to the bottom. It also gives the lure a larger profile as well, so if you're fishing in coloured water and you want something to sort of stand out a little bit more in the stained or muddy water, this is definitely worth a try. As the seasons change, cooling water temperatures will often mean that predators and their prey will often move from the areas that you normally find them during the summer months. So I've got the whole lake behind me, and here you can see quite a number of different locations and places where you might find fish holding in the autumn and winter months. Bait fish and predators will often be attracted to anywhere where you can find structure. So overhanging trees that are coming off the islands, bushes that are overhanging in the margins. We've got a jetty over in the background there that I caught a few perch and pike around this morning. And also there's an inlet at the top of this lake as well, which is pumping in water from the river. So anywhere where there are features for fish to kind of hold or hide around are often good places to try. Likewise, when fishing on rivers, you'll find that areas where you might have found fish in the summer aren't quite so productive, as those fish have moved into different parts of the river now that we're approaching the autumn and winter. So as we move into autumn, we get a lot more rain, but that will mean an increased flow in the rivers and more water going through the rivers as well. And what that will do is push bait fish into slack areas, or areas where there are big eddies, areas where the fish haven't got to expend quite as much energy holding in a strong current, and that's often where you'll also find the predators. So targeting anywhere where there's slack areas or big eddies is often a great place to try. Some of the areas on a river where you're likely to find slack water are weir pools, bends in the river where there's a change of the direction of current, in the margins. So most of the flow of the river will be going through the middle. So what it often does is it pushes fish into the margins, and these can be great places to try, especially if it's deep in the margins. And then also areas where you've got other rivers or cuts or canal joining in. So these are areas where you find slack water, and that can often be worth a try too. Crankbaits are one of my favourite types of lures to fish. They're great for covering lots of water, they're super effective, and they work all year round. And there's a few different types of crankbaits, and there are some particular models that I really like fishing during the autumn months as the water temperatures are cooling. And I've pulled out some of the favourite types here. So the first one is a floating crankbait. So this is a Strike King Pro Model Series 1. This one dives to around 4 foot, so it's nicely suited for fishing on small to medium sized rivers, like the River Rib here. This style of crankbait has a really wide wobble, so it gives off lots of movement, and it's also got a very loud rattle to it. So if you're fishing in slightly more coloured water, which is likely to be the case when you have lots of rainfall and the river rises and colours up, this can be a really good type of lure to use. Sometimes when you get a really cold snap, floating crankbaits aren't quite as effective because you have to fish them at a certain speed to get them running properly. And that's when a suspending crankbait can come into play. So something like the Lucky Shad. So this is a suspending crankbait, and is particularly effective in areas where there are bait fish holding and there are predators around and they're looking for an injured bait fish. So something that looks a little bit like it's injured or maybe dying with a slightly different action, something like this can be a great lure to try. So the way I would fish this is by casting out, keeping the rod tip low, winding 2 or 3 times just to get the lure down and diving to its required diving depth. And then I just twitch the lure, pause it, twitch the lure, pause it, and continue that retrieve. And often you'll always get the takes on the pause. Moving on to lakes, the same lures can work really well. So floating crankbaits, suspending crankbaits, they're both worth a try. But there's another type of crankbait that can also be worth giving a go too, and that's a lipless crankbait, so something like the red-eyed shad. The great thing about this is that it casts a mile, so it's great for covering lots of water, and it especially works very well when you're fishing over areas where you have like flat terrain, so like a plateau for example. And what you can do is fish it in areas where you've got like dead and dying weed, cast it out, and there's a couple of different ways you can fish it. You could fish it on a straight retrieve, and that's often enough to provoke bites, or just give it the odd little twitch and rip as you pull it through the weed. That can work really well too. Or probably one of my favourite methods is to cast out, let the lure fall to the bottom, give the rod a jerk up so you're getting the lure off and away from any weed or debris near the bottom, and then sweep the rod to the side, catch up with the slack and sweep the rod to the side again and just continue that retrieve. Not only is the lure wobbling really nicely as it falls on the drop, but you're keeping the lure relatively close to the bottom. So if you're fishing on a straight retrieve, the lure will rise up fairly quickly, whereas by fishing it with the sweeping style, you're always keeping it fairly close to the bottom, which when you get into colder conditions, that's where the predators are most likely to be. Two of the examples of the types of crankbaits I've talked about, so the lipless crankbait, the red-eyed shad, and the floating crankbait, the Pro Model Series 1. These were available in different sizes. So if I start with the red-eyed shad, there's a 14 gram tungsten 2-tap model and then a 21 gram model, so two different sizes. And then with the Pro model, there are actually 5 different sizes. So there's the 1, the 3, 4, 5 and 6. And as the number gets larger, they increase in size, and they also have longer diving bills as well, which are designed to take them deeper. Although these types of lures work all year round, I certainly wouldn't be without crankbaits in the autumn months. So definitely bring them along if you're heading out for a day's lure fishing. The leaves have started falling and the weeds are already dying back, and as we head deeper into autumn, more and more debris will be washed down the river, and there are a couple of minor tweaks I like to make to certain lures to avoid catching lots of dying vegetation. So with floating crankbaits, they often come with 2 sets of trebles, and often when you're fishing them in October and November in rivers, when all the leaves are falling, you'll often catch quite a few leaves, because not only do they float on the surface, but after a while they'll start sinking towards the bottom. Often just changing the back treble to a single hook can make enough of a difference, but if you're still getting hooked up with weed and leaves, then change the treble underneath the belly as well, and hopefully that will help. Moving on to soft baits, as well as being weedy, rivers can be extremely snaggy as well, and a lot of the time I like to rig my soft baits on an extra wide gape hook. Now there's a variety of different ways that you can fish soft baits rigged on an extra wide gape hook. This one here is rigged on an offset jig head, but there are other ways such as Texas rigging, Carolina rigging, Cheb rigging, and you can even use a drop shot rig with an extra wide gape hook. But the most important thing is to make sure that the soft bait is rigged correctly, so that the point of the hook is lightly skin hooked in the back of the soft bait. That's going to help you stop catching weed, leaves and other sediment on the bottom, but it'll also protect the hook point as well, I should point out. But when a fish takes the lure, as it pushes down on the soft bait, it'll expose the hook point and you can set the hook. So fishing a soft bait on an extra wide gape hook can really help when fishing in the autumn months, especially on weedy rivers that are full of leaves and sticks that are being washed down. When the water temperature really cools down towards the end of autumn, you'll notice that on certain days, fishing slower will often help you get more bites. And there's a way of customising skirted lures, such as spinnerbaits, chatterbaits and skirted jigs, that will not only help slow down the lure as you retrieve it through the water, but will often add attraction and movement to the lure as well. And that's by adding a soft plastic trailer. So I've rigged a few examples here. So this is a spinnerbait. This is the Strike King Premier Pro, rigged with a rage-tail grub as a trailer. And I rig it on just the same as I would do onto a normal jig head, making sure that the soft bait sits straight and isn't twisting as you retrieve it through the water. One important note is to make sure that any appendages that are rigged on to your spinnerbait or skirted jig or chatterbait are outside of the skirt, because what can happen is if the skirt comes too far back and the curl tail or paddle tail is touching the skirt, it can affect the movement of the lure and you don't get quite the same amount of action. So that's the spinnerbait. I've done the same thing here with the chatterbait. So this is a thunder cricket jig that's rigged with a rage craw. Again, I've made sure that the twin-tail claws are outside the area where the skirt is. And this is a great crayfish imitation. There's quite a few crayfish in this lake, so it may well be a lure that I'll give a go later on. And it doesn't just have to be on larger lures as well. Some of these smaller skirted jigs, such as the bitsy bug, you can add a lot more life to them by rigging them up with a smaller twin tail or creature bait. So I've rigged this one up with the Ned craw. It's a small lure that's designed for Ned rigging, really, but it also works really well as a trailer for these tiny little skirted jigs. So there are a few examples of lures with skirts and the types of lures that I like to use as trailers for them. There are even certain soft baits, some within the Strike King range, that are designed to be rigged onto skirted lures, and this is one of them. This is the raised chunk, and you'll notice that it's got big twin-tail claws that have tons of movement when you retrieve them through the water, but it's got a very short body that's designed to be rigged onto a slightly shorter hook that you might find on a spinnerbait, chatterbait or a skirted jig. So I'm going to rig this one up onto the bitsy bug. This is the 7-gram model, and as I mentioned earlier, I just rig it on there as if I'm rigging a soft bait onto a jig head, making sure that the body of the lure sits perfectly straight so there's no twisting as it falls on the drop or when I'm retrieving on a straight retrieve. And there you've just added a lot more movement and a bigger profile to an already great lure. We're coming to the end of the day now, and it's a Friday night, so there's been a few carp anglers that have been turning up during the day and they're now setting up their bivvies, and I think I'm going to give them a little bit of peace and quiet now and head on home. I hope you've enjoyed watching the video, and I hope it's given you a few ideas that you may be able to apply to your own fishing. So for more fishing related content, check out the Strike King YouTube page and like and subscribe.